Welcome back, everyone. We're ready to get started on Unit 2, and this unit is going to deal with how to explore data. So let's click here on this link for exploring data. And as before, we see a list of commands that we will learn about in this unit. In this unit, we're going to be concentrating on procedures, otherwise known as procs in SAS. And so here's the list that we will cover. We're going to scroll down some. We get to the beginning of our notes here. We're going to start off with a system option here called No Center, and this is going to affect our output so that instead of having the output centered, it's going to be left justified. Now we do this only as a matter of aesthetics and to make the output easier for you to read up on the screen. If you don't want to issue this command, that's no big deal. It's just to make the output look easier for this class. Alrighty, we'll move on to a proc contents, and this procedure tells you about the contents of the data set that you list here in the data option. So we're going to go back and continue to use our HS0 data set, and so we will find out how many observations we have in the data set and how many variables and other information like that will be given to us by proc contents. Alright, let's move over here to SAS. I'll click here. Now you see that I have altered the appearance of SAS on my copy of it. I have closed off the results and the Explorer windows that used to be over here on the side. I did that just to make my windows look a little bit bigger for the audience. If you still have yours open, that's fine. No big deal. It's just a matter of preference whether you have those windows opened or closed, and so you do whatever you like. Alright, let's start off by running some stuff here. I'm going to highlight my options and my proc contents, and I'm going to come up here and click on my running person. And we see here in the output window here, let's make it a little bit bigger, the results of our proc contents. So we see that we have a variable here called gender, variable race, ID, SES, all this stuff. These are numerics. This is a character variable or a string variable. This tells you the position of the variable in the data set, and this here tells you about the label associated with each of the variables. I'm going to scroll up a little bit here so that we see the beginning of this output. This here will tell you the name of the data set, the date it was created, the number of observations, number of variables, whether there's an index associated with the data set, on and on and on. All sorts of other information. If we scroll down some here, this is the output that we saw just a moment ago. And so this is the kind of thing you can expect from proc contents. And when you first receive a data set, this is probably the first proc that you will run so that you can see what is included in your data set. Alright, let's come over here to the editor window again. Now you'll notice that I somehow magically have all of the commands from the class notes appearing in my editor window, and that is because I brought them in from the notes so that I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time doing typing and making typos and that kind of stuff, so that we could discuss the program and move through this stuff at a reasonable pace. You can type this stuff in, or you can just copy and paste it from the class notes as we did in the last unit, whatever your preference is. Remember that this editor is nothing more than a text editor, so you can type in it just in the same way that you would with something like Notepad or WordPad or anything else like that. Okay, we're going to go on here and look at a proc print of this data set, and we see here that we have an option here that says obs equals 20, and what this means is show us up to 20 observations. because this data set actually has 200 observations, that could make for a very lengthy output. It's a little bit more than we need to see, and so we're just going to limit this down. This is a particularly handy option to know about if your data set is really massive. If it's like 1 million observations, 2 million observations, you definitely don't want to see all that in your output. And so this option here is very handy, and you can pick any number here that you want. Now, one thing to note here is that we haven't told SAS what variables we want to see in this output, and therefore SAS will include all of the variables in the data set in the output. If you have a relatively small data set like ours with only 11 variables, that's just fine. If you have a huge data set with hundreds or thousands of variables, that might not be what you want to do, and in just a moment we'll discuss what to do just to see those variables that you're interested in. But for now, we're going to highlight this. We're going to come up here to our running person, and we'll click here so that we can see. Now again, let's go check that log file, and we see no error messages here, any warnings, anything like that. We're told that 20 observations were read from the data set here, and so that looks fine. So we click back and we see our output. We see the 20 observations. Here are the values of gender. It looks like this is a 0-1 variable. Here's our ID variable. It looks like race has 5 values here. SES, it looks like it's got 3 values. School type looks like 2 values. Here's our character variable or our string variable here, and then our test scores. All right, let's come back here. We'll click on the editor, bring that back up to the forefront, and now let's talk about limiting this output down so that we see only the variables in which we're interested. So we're going to do the exact same proc print, except for we've left off our observations option here. And we've used a var statement, and on this statement you can just list out the variables that you want to see and the order in which you want to see them. So this order that you list them here determines the order that you will see them in the output. Okay, so I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to come up here and click on my running person. Again, let's come back here, check the log, and we'll scroll up just a little bit, and we see that here's our 200 observations read in, and we see absolutely no error messages or any reason to think anything went wrong. That's good. I'll click back here so I can see the output. All 200 observations. We're going to have to do some scrolling up here to see the top of this. Yep, scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. You can also press the page up key on your keyboard to make this go a little bit faster. So here we go. Alrighty. We see, again, we have gender, ID, race, SES, all the variables that we asked for, and all 200 observations of them. So once you've done a proc contents, perhaps the next proc that you'll run when you first get a new data set is a proc print to see what things actually look like, to see what the actual rows and columns of the variables look like. This tells you a bunch about how things are coded and stuff like that. So another very, very handy procedure. Okay, now let's move on and do some descriptive statistics on some of these variables. Now the basic descriptive statistics command in SAS is proc means. So we'll come back down here to our class notes, bring those back up here, and we have a proc means command, and you will notice here that there is no var statement here, which means that this will do exactly what we saw up here with our proc print that had no var statement. Well, we'll get the means for all of the variables that are in the data set. And I should point out that this means all of the numeric variables, not all of the variables, because obviously we're not going to be getting means and standard deviations and stuff like that for that one character variable that we have in our data set. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to come back down here and click on SAS to bring that back up. This is our output. We're not so interested in that anymore. Let's come down here and click on our editor. so that we can see the program. I'm going to scroll down some. Here is our proc means. We have our data set listed. Now, technically, this data option that you see on every single one of these procs is not necessary. The procedure will in fact run if you leave this option off. However, it will run on the last data set that was active, and it can be kind of confusing as to which data set that was. So we strongly recommend that you always use the data equals option on all of your procs so that you know exactly which data set the proc is running on. Now, you will also note that we have in here the full path name of where the data set is located. Okay, this is where mine is located on my hard drive, and when you get the path names like this, typically you put them in quotes like this. You can either use single or double quotes, but you just have to be consistent within the path name. So this here is telling us that this is a permanent data set, okay, as opposed to the temporary data sets that we had been creating in the last unit. And if we had it as a temporary data set, we wouldn't need the quotes and we wouldn't need the path specification. All we'd need is the name of the data set. So those are some points to keep in mind. And the last thing I'd like to warn you about are these quotes here. If you forget to close one of these quotes and then you run the procedure, for example, if I ran the procedure like this, very bad things would happen, and it's actually kind of difficult to get SAS to break out of the problem caused by this. So, and you can see that all the coloration here has changed and it looks kind of strange. So please try your very best not to submit something with unbalanced quotes, because it really throws SAS for a loop, and you usually have to break out of the command in order to do that. And when you need to break out of something, if you get into an infinite loop or you get into a problem like this, what you click on is this exclamation point up here with the circle that says break, and it will break you out of whatever problem SAS has gotten itself into, and you can go back and fix the problem and resubmit it. So, all those words of warning. Now, let's just highlight this, and you can click on your running person, or you can press the F3 key on your keyboard. We'll click there. Let's go have a quick peek at the log. We'll click here for our log window, and I'm going to scroll up just a little bit, and we see that the means procedure was used and no errors. Okay, I'm going to click back here for my output. Let's see here. I'm going to page up a little bit. Yeah, that's what I thought. Here we go. Here's the top of our output. Okay, for the variable gender, we have an N of 200, a mean of 0.545. Here's the standard deviation. Here's the minimum, and here's the maximum. All right, the same setup for the variable ID, 200 observations. We have this mean, this standard deviation, this minimum, and this maximum, and so forth. And so it goes through all of the variables in the data set, all the numeric variables in the data set, and tells us all of this information. Now, the one thing I'd like to point out here is that you'll notice that science, the variable science right here, has only 195 observations. And what this tells us is that we have 5 observations with missing data. And that will become important later on in the class, so I just wanted to point it out here and now, and you can keep it in the back of your mind. And when we move on to some other stuff, we'll see what happens when we have some missing observations. Okay, so that is proc means with no var statement. I'm going to come down here and click on my editor window again. And now we're going to try a proc means with a couple of twists. So here you can see that we've added the var statement, and this means that we will get our statistics only for these 4 variables. You can also see up here that we have listed out the statistics that we would like to see. So we've asked for the mean, the median, standard deviation, variance, and this N over here is for the count. So let's highlight all of this, and we'll come up and click on our running person. And I'm going to, oops, scroll the wrong way and lose the output. No. Here we go. So we have the variable read, and we have its label. Here's the n we requested, the mean, here's the median, the standard deviation, and the variance. I'll scooch over a little bit, see if we can't see all of the variance. So there's the variance for all of these. And so there's a whole list of statistics that you could list out on the mean statement so that you can get exactly what you want in your output. Okay, let's go back here to our editor and click on this. And you'll notice one thing interesting here, that for some reason var is not blue the way that all these other keywords are blue. And I think that's just an error in the SAS Editor, that it doesn't recognize this as one of the keywords, and therefore it's not blue. So you don't get an error message. Typically when something is not colored the same way as everything else, that's kind of SAS's way of trying to tell you before you run the procedure or whatever that you've got a problem. But in this case, there is no problem, and you get exactly what you want here. So let's scroll down some. Here we're going to do another proc means, but we're going to make some changes here. And the change we're going to make now is adding a where statement. And what this does is kind of subsets the data set on the fly. And so what we will see in our output are these statistics for these variables only when this condition is true. So only when the reading score is greater than or equal to 60. Okay, so let's highlight this, and we'll come over here to our running person. We will click on this, and we see here our output. Let's go back and check that log real quick. Click here, and we see no error messages, any warnings. Looks like everything ran okay. That's good. So we'll come back down here. We'll click on our output again. Okay, and we see now that all of the n's are 56 except for our science, which is down to 53. And so this is the result of that subsetting that we did. So it appears that there were 56 students who had a reading score greater than or equal to 60. And so we see all of the statistics that were requested for each of these, and it appears that there were still a couple of students who had these high reading scores who were still missing their science score. Alrighty, so that's one way to subset the data. Let's come back here to our editor window. We'll click down here, and let's look at another way of subsetting our data set. I'll scroll down a little bit here, and we come back to another proc means. Again, we're requesting these same statistics, but now instead of using a where statement, we're going to use a class statement. And what this will do is break down the descriptive statistics by the variable or variables that you list out on the class statement. So here we want these statistics for these variables broken down by this variable. Okay? So let's highlight all of this. We'll come up here and click on our running person. And we see we get lots of output here. Again, we're going to come back and check on that log. And just click down here. Okay, everything's looking fine. So I'm going to come back here and click on the output. Alrighty, there we go. And we're going to scroll up some here. Alright, so we see here that we have our 3 program types. We see how many observations we have for each of these program types. And here are our variables. Here's the variable labels, and here is the n's, means, medians, standard deviations, scrolling over just a little bit, and then here's the variance down here. And the output wraps like this just when SAS runs out of room. So, and there are of course ways to trim down the number of decimal places to which all of these statistics are displayed to. Obviously we're running them out to probably more decimal places than we would really want to, but you know, in general, this is how it works, and there are options to make this output look pretty much any way that you want it to look. Alrighty, so that's proc means here. Let's come back down here to our class notes. We'll click on here, and we need to scroll down some. So we've done all this, and now we're down to our proc univariate. And this will give us detailed descriptive statistics for our variables. And this one also allows us to create some graphs, which may be very helpful in describing our data. So let's come back here to our SAS program here. Open this up. I'm going to click here on my editor so that I see my program. I'm going to scroll down some. Here's our proc univariate. We have requested a plot here. We are going to use the variable right, and we would like to see a histogram with a normal curve overlaid. Now this slash here indicates options, so on this histogram statement, normal is an option. Alrighty, I'm going to highlight what I want to run. I'm going to come up here to my running person, click there. Oh boy, and we saw a whole bunch of stuff flash by. Alrighty, first things first, let's go look at our log. Okay, univariate procedure was used and no error messages. Okay, that's great. Let's come over here and look at the output. Looks like an awful lot of stuff. I'm going to press the page up key so that I can get up to the top of my output. There we are. So we have here the parameters, the symbols, their estimates, all of this stuff, goodness of fit for normal distributions. Oh my goodness, all sorts of output. Let's scroll down some more here. We see the percents observed and estimated. I'm going to press my page down key some. Where's the rest of the output? Is that all? Okay. So this is all the output out of this univariate, but where's our graph? Okay, come over here to your Graph 1 window. Go ahead and click on that, and here is our histogram that we requested. This blue line is the normal curve overlay that we requested on that option. And so we can see that at least the way that this histogram is broken down, writing is not too normally distributed. It's not too bad, but it's not as good as it could be. So that's proc univariate. Now another common form of graph that is used for descriptive statistics is the box plot. And so we can make some box plots with, of course, proc box plot. Alrighty, so let's go back and have a look to see how we might do this. I'm going to click down here on my editor window. There we go. I'm going to scroll down some here. And so here's our proc box plot, our data option. We ask for a plot here, and we're going to do right by program type, and we've got some options here. Now before we get to the proc box plot though, we need to use proc sort to sort the data by program type so that SAS can break out the variable right by the variable program type. So we need to run both of these together, or at least you need to run the proc sort before you run the proc box plot. Alrighty, so we got all that highlighted. We're going to come up here and click on our running person. We do all of this, and we come back to the graph window. And you will notice that this does not look anything like a box plot. In fact, it looks very familiar, and it's that last graph that we made, and we kind of wonder what happened. Well, the only thing that happened is that you have yet to press the page down key on your keyboard. So go ahead and press that. And there you go. There are your box plots. Why the graph window defaults up there instead of scrolling down to the current graph, I don't know. But if you ever wonder what happened to your graphs, the first thing to try is pressing on page down. So here are our box plots, and we can see that, not surprising, the academic group seems to be up a little bit higher than the general group, which seems to be up a little bit higher than the vocational group. Not a whole lot of surprise here. We see that our outliers are displayed with little boxes outside. And so this is what we get for the graphs. Now let's go back here and check on our log. We'll click here. Okay. No errors showing up here. That's good. So let's come back here and look at the rest of the output. And we come over here and we see that, in fact, we have no other output. So all that Proc box plot gives you are, in fact, box plots. So that kind of makes some sense. And so that's that. Other procedures that will give you descriptive statistics kinds of stuff, another common one would be Proc Freq. And this isn't Proc Weird or Proc Strange, it's short for Proc Frequency. So let's come back here to our editor window. We'll click down here. I'm going to scroll down some. And here is our first Proc Freq. And again, our data option. This table statement is necessary, and this tells SAS for which variables you want frequency counts, okay? You can see it as table or tables. You can have it with the plural. If you add the S in there, you see that it remains blue. There's no error. You can run it either way, okay? So I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to come up here and click on my running person. And now I'm going to hit the page up key some. No, I guess there is only this output. Normally Proc Freq gives you a ton of output. So here is SES. Here are the frequencies for all of this. Here are the percentages, the cumulative frequencies, cumulative percents, all of that kind of information. Okay. So now, how about if we make a graph of this output? That I think would be kind of useful. I'm going to come back down here to my editor window. And to make that graph, I am going to use Proc Chart. We have data equals here, a semicolon. And now you notice here that for some reason our VBAR statement is up here with our proc statement. If you press the enter key right there and move it down, that's more in line with what you're used to seeing in class. But the point is most of this is just for the aesthetics of the people who look at the program and not for SAS's well-being. SAS will run it either way. It doesn't really care. It's just what's ever easier for you to read. And the same thing goes with all this indenting that you've been seeing. This is done to make the program more readable, more aesthetically pleasing, but in fact it's not necessary and you can run it with or without the indenting. Alright, so we're going to highlight this, come up here and click on our running person, and there we go. So there is our chart of SES, and so we see the various frequencies for these three groups. And if we come back here to our editor, we see that we had used the discrete option, and that's what breaks it out for us like this. So when you're using a categorical variable, you're often well off to use the discrete option here. All right, let's try something else here. Let's try another Proc Freq, and this time instead of using a categorical variable, let's scroll down here, and we'll try this with a continuous variable. And I see some people kind of shaking their heads or looking a little bit inquisitive about this, and you have a good reason to be like that. Let's come up here and click on our running person and see what happens. And we'll page up a little bit here so we can see all of the output. And you're right, there's a ton of output, and this is exactly why you usually don't do a frequency table on a continuous variable, because you get a long list of things that probably will not be as useful for you as you would like. Okay, what happens if you would like to use multiple variables on your table statement in Proc Freq? Let's have a go at that. I'm going to come down here and click on my editor window. Scroll down just a little bit so we can see the code. And we're going to get separate frequency counts for each of these three variables. Highlight all of that, and I will click on my running person up here. Let's go back here and check the log real quick. I'll click here. Okay, everything's looking fine. We don't see any errors. We don't see any warnings. All that looks good. So I'm going to come back here and click on my output so I can see all of that. And here are the frequencies for each of the 3 variables that we requested. And you can also see here that if we had a label, the label is also given. Okay, so that is one-way tables in Proc Freq. What about two-way tables, or in other words, crosstabs? Well, of course, we can get that. Let's come down here and click on our editor. And we're going to scroll down a little bit so that we see our next procedure. And you see that the difference here is the star in between these 2 variables on the table statement. And this tells SAS to make a crosstab for us. So we're going to highlight all of this, come over here to our running person, and we click there, and now we see our frequency table. So now the key to reading all of these numbers in here is up here. So this tells us that the top number is the frequency that occurs in that cell, the next number is the percent, the next number is the row percent, and the last number is the column percent. Okay, so that's what all of these numbers mean. So this is the frequency, this is the percent of the total data that are in this cell, this is the percent for the row, the percent for the column, and that's what all these numbers mean. And then of course you have either the row frequencies in percent or column frequencies in percents down here. And here are our totals. Okay, so that's creating a crosstab. Now, when you see a crosstab like this, you might ask yourself, well, are there any statistically significant differences anywhere in here? We would run a chi-squared test to answer that kind of question. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll come down here and click on our editor. And we see here that the next Proc Freq is exactly the same as this one up here that we just ran, except for that we have requested a couple of options. Here, this is chi-squared, and this is asking for the expected frequencies as well. Highlight all this, running person, and we'll scroll up just a little bit here. Okay, this is the output that we have already seen. This is the same as that previous Proc Freq. Scroll down some more, and then here are the statistics that we requested. Okay, so here is the chi-squared, and as you can tell, it is statistically significant. So, oh, what about the expected? Let's scroll back up here. We almost blew right past that. So the first number is the frequency, and then the second number is the expected. So here the actual frequency was 19, the expected was 24.675. Here the frequency was actually 44. We were expecting about 50. Okay, so that is Proc Freq. Let's come back down here to our editor. We'll click here, and I think the last descriptive type of statistic that we're going to go over today is called Proc Core. It doesn't have anything to do with core of the earth or anything, rather it is correlations. So we have our data set option here, just as before. We have a var statement listing out the variables for which we would like to see correlations. And we should note that by default, Proc Core uses a pairwise deletion for missing observations. And so we're going to do this both as a pairwise and then later down here as a listwise deletion. And we've included the variable science here so that you can see the difference in the way that missing values are handled in each of these 2 cases. So let's highlight that first Proc Core, and we'll come over here to our running person, and we click here. Let's jump over to our log real fast, click on your log window, and just make sure that nothing funny happened on the way. Okay, everything's looking good, so I'm going to come back down here and look at my output. Okay, so I don't see the top of my output. I'm going to press page up. Okay, there we go. Here's the top of the procedure output here. And we can see that we have the three variables that we requested, some simple statistics here, and then we scroll down a little bit more to see our actual correlations. And so here, this is right with right. Obviously, that correlation's 1, and we use 200 observations here. Here we have science with right, and we see that 195 observations got used here. 195 observations got used in the correlation between science and read, and this is because science had those 5 missing observations that we talked about earlier. And all these other correlations are based on 200 observations here. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Let's come back to our editor, click here, and now we're using the no miss option, and let's see how things are a little bit different. I'm going to highlight all this, click on the running person, and now we see that we do not have the ends displayed down here. Rather, we have a note up here saying that all of the correlations are based on an N of 195. And so here is the list-wise deletion here, meaning that if there were data missing for any of the 3 variables listed on that var statement, those observations got deleted for all of the correlations, whether or not that one particular variable was involved in the correlation or not. Okay, so this will affect your the actual correlations that you see here a little bit. They're a little bit different from what we saw up above. And we should point out that there's really no right or wrong way of doing this, either with or without the no miss option. It's whatever is appropriate for your situation. All right, the last thing we're going to get to here is a simple regression. We're going to use Proc Reg for this. And no, it's not Proc Regulation, it's Proc Regress or Proc Regression. So click down here on your editor. Scroll down to the last thing here. It's shortened down to Proc Reg. Here are our data set we're going to be using. We have a model statement here, and this is our dependent variable equals our independent variable. Because we're doing simple regression, we only have one independent variable. And we have a plot statement, and this will create the scatter plot that we'd like to see of these 2 variables. So I'm going to highlight this and come up to my running person, click here, and all sorts of stuff rushes by, and here's the plot. Okay, so each of these pluses here represents an observation, and then here is the regression line drawn in right here. And if you look over here to the side, we have some statistics over here telling you about the regression that was run to create this. And here is the actual equation right up here. Okay, let's come down here and look at the log real quick. Okay, nothing going on there, so that's okay. So we'll come down here and look at our output. Click down here, and here's our regression output. So we have here the analysis of variance table. Here's our model, and it looks like the model is statistically significant. We have all of this stuff here. Here's our adjusted R-squared. Here is the intercept. Here's the variable read. Here are the parameter estimates, and this is what we saw at the top of our graph just a moment ago. Here's the t-test and the p-value associated, and so it looks like that the variable read is statistically significant, which we're not surprised about because the overall model was statistically significant, and because read is the only independent variable. If the model's significant, read has to be as well. And so that is an introduction to some of the descriptive statistics procedures that are available to you in SAS. There are quite a few more that we haven't gone over, and so we recommend that you try some stuff out, see how it works, and we're going to take another short break before we move on to Unit 3.